Hello, everyone. I'm Rob McDonald. Welcome to Métis in Canada, the podcast, where we invite special guests to come in and talk about the Métis people, history, culture, as well as the current political state of affairs. This week, I'm proud to introduce Will Goodon, the Minister of Housing for the Manitoba Métis Federation. But he's joining us today not to talk about housing specifically, but to talk about Louis Riel and the legacy of Louis Riel as the leader of the Métis Nation. Welcome, Will.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here. I almost feel like it's a bit of a calling for me to make sure that people understand who we are, and that includes who Louis Riel was.
Absolutely. On November 16th, 1885, Louis Riel was hanged for high treason after being found guilty in a Regina courthouse. And, in what many described as a flawed court process. And, everybody kind of considered Louis Riel as a rebel over time. But, his legacy lives on, at least for the Métis Nation. Why is that?
Yeah, there's no doubt that the reason his legacy is even more pronounced today than it probably was back in his own day is because he stood up. He stood up for what was right, and he never wavered from that. Political expediency, something we see throughout the ages. At the time, the prime minister wanted to build a country. Louis Riel, the Métis Nation, was in the way, and he needed to make an example that he wasn't going to be pushed to the side by some half breeds, what we were then called. And in today's day, I think it's even more. We're more able to see it, and I think the general population of Canada is has that understanding that he was a founding father, that he was someone who stood up for justice for his people, but for the greater good as well. As late as maybe 15, 20 years ago, we still had some voices, and there's still a few who would call him a traitor because he, fought against the Canada. But the thing is that we now know that maybe Canada isn't always right. Canada maybe makes mistakes. They did in the past. They didn't. They're making mistakes today. We're led by human beings who make mistakes. I think that idea of Real is much more visible today because he was standing up for what was right.
Every year on November 16th, the leadership of the Métis Nation will gather at Louis Riel's gravesite in St. Boniface, which is a subdivision in downtown Winnipeg. And I remember attending one of these ceremonies in Winnipeg, and President David Chartrand, the president of the Manitoba Métis Federation, was delivering his comments, and he got very emotional, talking about Riel and talking about what he's done for the Métis Nation. Where does that emotion come from?
I think it comes from the idea of us, when Riel was murdered, and I'll say that in public anywhere. The government of Canada murdered our president, the first premier of Manitoba. And, when that happened, we had to hide. We had to be ashamed. And, for years and years, that was the case. My father, when he was young, he had to hide. He had to hide his identity. When he raised us, he taught us to be proud. But that shame was still there for a long, long time. This idea of him being a traitor um, is not valid. He stood up, and the emotion that we all feel when we stop for the day on November 16th is our some anger, some of that shame that's still wrapped up from when we were hiding. Um, but it's also now our ability to stand up in a country, in the province that we founded, and rightfully claim what he stood for, what we all, all of our ancestors stood behind him. to, make the negotiations happen to our benefit. Uh, the government didn't fulfill their promises. They made a promise
Mhm.
to him, and then they just went back on their word. But today we're in a place where we can stand up, where we are standing up, where the voice of the true historic Métis Nation is being heard right across the country. And I think President Chartrand is a big part of that. He's taken that torch from Mr. Riel and has taken it even further to a place where we are recognized, that we are, not ashamed, and it's that feeling of having to hide, but now having the ability to proclaim who we are and being proud.
Absolutely, and giving credit, of course, to the person who got us here and started this whole revolution that has started, and that is Louis Riel. Before we go on any further, though, how about if we share this Métis Minute, courtesy the Manitoba Métis Federation?
Most Manitobans celebrate Louis Riel Day in February, but the Red River Métis mark the extraordinary life of the founder and first premier of Manitoba on different dates. One such day is Louis Riel's birth in 1844, celebrated every October 22nd. The other important day is November 16th. Following his voluntary surrender to the Northwest Mounted Police, Louis Riel was executed in Regina in 1885 for his role in leading his nation in defense of their rights. The anniversary of his death remains a somber occasion for the Red River Métis, and many visit his resting place at the Basilica in St. Boniface. Even though he was 41 at the time of his death, Louis Riel had already accomplished many great things, including the creation of Manitoba, which remains the only province to be led into Canada's Confederation by an Indigenous people.
There you go. So Riel actually went to the United States for a period of time. He went into exile after being chased out of the Red River region. He had a bounty on his head, $5,000. Then it was boosted up to $10,000. He had bounty hunters chasing him across the United States. And then eventually he did establish some roots there. He was down there for a number of years, and it was interesting because he was nominated to be a member of Parliament in Manitoba. He couldn't take his seat because he was in exile, and then as he ended up coming back into Canada and ended up going into being charged with high treason, and as he was waiting in jail, he wrote a letter to the U.S. government, President Grover Cleveland, because he heard the stories of the Métis living in the United States who were being told that they could not sell their furs, they could not sell their pemmican, they were being stopped by the Hudson Bay Company. And he even remembered his on U.S. roots, and this is why he wrote this letter to plead to President Cleveland to allow the Métis to be able to sell their furs. And a very, very interesting person indeed, remembering his roots both in the U.S. as well as in Canada.
Yeah, and I think that reflects a little bit on who we are as a nation. Our homeland was not the colonial homeland of either the United States or of Canada or the provinces or the states. These straight lines that were drawn. We followed the buffalo, and that was our homeland where we lived, hunted, practiced our traditions, and one of the really my family is also cross border. So my grandmother was Michif. She spoke Michif. She lived on the American side of the Turtle Mountain. My grandfather lived on the Canadian side. They lived when they got married. They lived on each side for a period of time and ended up staying in Canada. I also had the opportunity to go down to Lewistown, Montana, for the last couple of years. They have a celebration on September long weekend, and I'll tell you, the Métis pride is still extremely strong there. A lot of those folks are from the Turtle Mountain area, so I'm related to a lot of them. But
Mhm.
the this idea of nationhood transcends these borders, and obviously Riel, he was the kind of guy that would put others first. and we can see that even when he stood trial because he wanted to tell the story. He knew that he was likely to end up being murdered,
Mhm.
but he wanted to tell the story of his people. And when he's in jail and still advocating on behalf of folks who live in the United States, who again are part of our historic nation, uh, you can't. Really hard to find fault in a fellow who's putting his people before his own life.
Mhm.
That's incredible. That doesn't happen very often in history.
Yeah, for many, many years, people viewed Rial as a rebel. Some said, though, he should be exonerated for his crimes. And now I know the Métis Nation has always maintained that, he shouldn't be exonerated. He did nothing wrong. All he did was stood up for people, stood up for the people that he believed in. And I
Yeah.
think today we're finally seeing that recognition coming through.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the phrases that I've heard people say, and even the Riel family, is to let the stain remain,
Mhm.
because Riel wouldn't want, as we just said, he looked out for other people. He wouldn't want his name to be cleared. Without the idea that the nation that he fought for, stood for, and died for, it would be still kept on the fringes of Canadian society. He would rather that we use his legacy to move forward on all the important issues, whether it's education or housing or land or economic development or the future of our people, the identity of our people. He would rather it be used for the good, and let the stain remain.
All right, let's take a look at this Métis in Canada, Métis Minute recognizing Louis Riel.
Our job is, I think, as a nation, is to truly start putting in place the true history.
I want to plan to take this to the gravesite of Louis Riel.
Canada is more acceptance to recognizing him as the first premier. We still haven't got that achieved in Manitoba yet, but we will.
Our government's first piece of legislation will honor Louis Riel for what he has always been, the first premier of Manitoba.
We corrected history. We put the man that should have been there from the beginning as the first premier, and we did justice for Riel. 30 years of my life I've been fighting for this and wanting the day when one premier will do the right thing.
Rob, let me look straight in your eyes and tell you thank you very much on behalf of my people.
Louis Riel is the reason that we are Manitobans.
He was a hero, and to this day, he's still a hero.
Brought to you by the Red River Métis government.
Once again, thank you to the Manitoba Métis Federation for that beautiful video. Really, really a nice job, and it really encapsulates the importance of that moment, which happened in December of 2023, when the Manitoba legislature actually passed unanimously, or giving royal assent to the Louis Riel Act.
Yeah, it was one of the things I tell youth when we're seeing what's happening today is to not take these things for granted, to look at these days of such importance, and understand that they are extremely important. And that was one of those days for sure. It was an honor to be there, an honor to participate in that. When historians look back on some of the things that have happened in 100 years, they'll look back on Riel, but they'll also look back on all the work that his nation has done, especially in the last 20, 25 years.
Among the last words of Louis Riel, he said, "My people will sleep for 100 years, and when they awake, it'll be the artists who give them back their spirit." And I think today the Métis Nation is alive and well. That spirit is starting to come out. People are standing up and saying, "I am proud to be Métis," across the Métis Nation, which they hadn't done for many, many years.
Yeah.
And that's really good to see.
Yeah, 100%. I see that all the time. I remember I started with the MMF almost 30 years ago, and we started to slowly get people to wear clothes, to put up the flag in their front yard, and it wasn't that well accepted even 30 years ago. But now You will see people that pride everywhere you go. You drive down Main Street in Winnipeg, you drive in every community throughout Manitoba, you'll see flags, you'll see the pride, you'll hear the Red River Jig, and it's really heartwarming to see where we've come around. 150 some years later, and Riel is not a traitor. Riel is a father of Manitoba.
There's a lot of leaders across the Métis Nation. Ray St. Germain is one of these gentlemen who just passed during the summertime. I know that there's a street in Winnipeg that's recognized, that he's recognized for. There's a park, that's been named after Métis leaders and so on. We're making that progress slowly but surely. Economic development, housing, healthcare, a lot of improvements happening across the Métis Nation today.
Yeah, exactly. And, we've got great partners. There's no doubt about that. But I think leadership in the last 25 to 30 years has been key, to have that vision. And President Chartrand, former national president Clement Chartier, I look at them and others who went before, whether it was Senator Ed Head or President Yvonne Dumont and others who, did a lot of work to build the foundation so that we could build on that and reach even higher.
I'd like to share a poem that I wrote, which I turned into a little bit of a video. I call this my tribute to Riel, but it's really a tribute to yourself, a tribute to President Chartrand and all the other leaders that have gotten us to where we are today.
Out of the darkness he came, across a prairie sky, the silhouette of a man who heard the Métis cry. With a large black hat and a bushy beard, Riel was his name, be forever revered. With God by his side, he would heed the call, spoke for the rights of Red River Métis, one man stood tall. He petitioned John A. for recognition, rights, and land, under a provisional government determined to take a stand. Finally, in 1870, Métis were told they could stay, plus 1.4 million acres set aside for their children one day. But no sooner was Manitoba born, surveyors and Scottish settlers grew. Ignoring area Métis, a serious uprising began to brew. Once more, Riel was called upon. He stood on the surveyor's chain. Instead, John A. sent in a military force, ignoring Métis again. Kicked off their land, Red River Métis headed west along the Carleton Trail. Riel went south into exile, with bounty hunters hot on his tail. Years later, Métis in Saskatchewan asked John A. to own the soil. Riel, having returned from down south, saw tempers starting to boil. The Northwest Rebellion flared. Métis and Canadian military fought. Duck Lake, Fish Creek, then Batoche, last stand that would never be forgot. Riel tried and found guilty for high treason, a Regina court would say. Ordered to pay the ultimate price, hanged on this day. Out of the darkness he came, across a prairie sky, the silhouette of a man who heard the Métis cry. Riel.
There you go, my poem, and I'd really enjoy talking with you today. Are there any last thoughts, Minister Goodon, before we wrap?
Well, Rob, I just want to say thank you for making this space available for us to talk about things like this, talk about the veterans like you did with Minister Null, and all the others I know that are going to be coming down the line. It's just I think appropriate that we do something like this more than we ever have in the past. Communication to telling our story, telling Riel's story is absolutely not just important but vital. And lastly, I just want to say that Louis Riel Jr. Is obviously a hero to all of us, and I think with his determination, his intelligence, his vision, I'm not sure that we would be here today if he wasn't able to combine all those things, inspire all the people who were around him, We may have been subject to what John A. Macdonald wanted, which was to erase us from history. And then 150 years later, we see that it's Louis Riel's name who's standing in history, even prouder. And it's John A. Macdonald's name that is being stained. So, we need to keep telling that story. That's what Riel said, to tell the story so that the youth of our generations can understand why they had to fight and why we have to do what we have to do in order to gain our place back in this society, in this country that we helped build. Thanks, Rob.
Absolutely, yes. Terrific final words. Minister Will Goodon with the Manitoba Métis Federation. Again, thank you very much for joining us today to talk about the legacy of Louis Riel. So thank you everyone for joining us. If you enjoyed this feature, give us a thumbs up or subscribe. And, we'll see you next time right here on Métis in Canada, the podcast.